revealed how a $30 million inheritance led to a shocking twist that transformed our lives. Jackson Niller stood in his small, messy classroom, surrounded by the chaos of students working on their science projects. Laughter filled the air, but he felt as if he was enveloped in a fog of confusion. The phone call had come hours ago, those dreaded words from a lawyer announcing his estranged father's death and the unexpected windfall of $30 million. It felt like someone churned his stomach and knocked the air out of him. All eyes in this small Texas town would be on him now, the middle school teacher turned rich guy. The thought lingered like a specter. With every detail he learned about the inheritance, his mind raced with conflicting emotions, a cocktail of unease and surprise that rattled his sense of self. He'd fought all his life to teach the values of humility and hard work. How could he reconcile these principles with such unearned wealth? A deluge of questions bombarded him. Would this change his family's way of life? Would it create a rift between him and his neighbors, who, despite their love and admiration, might start to regard him with envy or distrust? An image of Sarah, his supportive life, flashed in his mind. He had always promised her they'd navigate life together, simple yet fulfilling. But now, this inheritance threatened to tip the delicate equilibrium they had built with their children, Amy and Ethan, feeding entitlement instead of gratitude. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As he tried to focus on his teaching, his heart thumped irregularly, each beat echoing the dilemma that filled his chest. The world outside the classroom, once so familiar, now seemed riddled with suspicion. Friends he had known for years began to glance at him sideways, whispering about the rich guy behind closed doors. He felt the tension rising, an invisible barrier forming between him and the community he loved. Just when he thought things couldn't get more complicated, he unearthed secrets that clawed relentlessly at his conscience. Horrific truths about how his father had amassed the wealth, using dubious practices in the oil industry that ruined the town's landscape and people. The weight of that legacy was a heavy chain around his neck. How could he stand idly by, confronting moral depravity entwined with bloodlines? As pressure built, Jackson recognized a choice looming over him.
Would he embrace the life of luxury and comfort, or would he dig deep, using this money to confront his father's destructive legacy? With each moment passing, desperation clawed at his resolve. Torn between possibility and principle, he felt his connection to the land, the people, slipping away like grains through his fingers. Could he turn this dark inheritance into something that healed rather than harmed? The more he pondered, the stronger the urge to act surged within him, a fire igniting against the bone-chilling dread of his forebearer. In the quiet chaos of his classroom, Jackson realized profound transformation awaited him. Would he rewrite his family story, flipping the narrative on its head? Or would the past drag him down into a legacy of pain that he could hardly fathom? His heart raced as dread nodded with the tiniest spark of hope. The fork in the road loomed larger, and soon he would have to make a choice that would alter everything. The next morning, Jackson stood in front of the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Sleep had come and gone, plagued by dreams that switched between exhilaration and dread. His clothes felt tighter, as if they symbolically squeezed him into a box of expectations he hadn't asked for. Splashes of cold water roused him, but not enough to clear the fog of uncertainty. His phone buzzed incessantly, the screen flashing notifications, calls and messages pouring in, each one a reminder of the new reality. This newfound wealth wasn't a blessing. It loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. He couldn't shake the suffocating sensation that accompanied his transition from teacher to a perceived millionaire overnight. Each text was a potential landmine, triggering questions from friends and family, stirring whispers about how his recently deceased father's fortune would alter their lives. Jackson turned away from the mirror, the weight of not just the inheritance but the legacy it represented bearing down on him. He slipped on his shoes, a ritual as familiar as his morning routine, but today it felt different. Each tug at the laces invoked a sense of impending change. He headed out the door to meet Sarah for coffee before school. He needed her perspective, her calm amidst his swirling doubts. As they sat across from one another in the small cafe, The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Jackson watched Sarah take a sip, her eyes sparkling with warmth. But beneath that surface, he detected a hint of apprehension. "You seem distant, Jackson. What's going on in that head of yours?" He hesitated, torn between shielding her from his internal chaos and seeking her support. "I'm grappling with what this means for us. I mean, I didn't ask for any of this," he said, fingertips grazing the rim of his cup. "And I keep thinking about my father's legacy. How can I accept this inheritance knowing how he made his money?" Sarah's brow furrowed slightly, and her voice softened.
You don't have to carry that weight alone. Remember what you said about starting fresh? Maybe this is an opportunity, one that allows you to redefine what that wealth stands for. Jackson could feel warmth blossom in his chest at her words, but the doubt still nagged at him. What if it leads us to becoming what I despise? I want our kids to grow into empathetic individuals, grounded in reality, not detached by wealth. It's what you do with that money that matters, not the money itself. Her calm conviction grounded him. In that moment, clarity pierced through the confusion, revealing a path he hadn't deeply considered. This wasn't just about him. It was about his family and his community. What if he used the inheritance to invest in sustainable practices that could reclaim and restore the town his father had tarnished? An idea sparked and ignited, a passion fueled by purpose. Strengthened by Sarah's support, he envisioned creating new educational resources in the community, developing programs that taught young minds about sustainable living and ethical practices. This could reshape not just his family's destiny, but perhaps theirs as well. With determination rising in him, Jackson left the cafe, and his heart began to beat with purpose rather than dread. He could change the narrative. As he ventured into school, contemplating his next steps, he felt the weight shift ever so slightly. A flicker of hope accompanied the realization that he could rewrite the story, not just for himself, but for the entire town. Yet the shadows of his father's past still loomed large. The time had come to face the swirling doubts and the challenging legacy, and more significantly, it was time to confront the community's skepticism head-on. Jackson needed to gather support for the bold move he was about to propose. Would his plan for redemption be received with open arms or cold shoulders? The stakes felt high, the next step looming like a precipice. With resolve hardening, he thought, this is only the beginning. A new path felt tangible. The community was still out there waiting. He just had to hold steadfast against the tide. What would his first move be? The challenge before him stretched fast, but Jackson was ready to act. The clock was ticking on his chance to redefine his father's legacy. In the midst of this ambition, another unexpected message came through, this one from the lawyer. The news held the potential to set off a chain of events that could change everything once again. Jackson's phone buzzed sharply, reverberating against the wooden desk of his classroom. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the name of his father's lawyer, David Granger. The message was straightforward, yet pulsated with implications. We need to discuss your father's estate. Important developments require your immediate attention. His heart raced at the weight of those words. Images of the conversations he had had with the lawyer before his father passed flooded his mind. Strategy discussions, the tangled web of financial commitments, and the convoluted mess of legal stipulations that would surface at the inheritance's unveiling. Yet today, underneath that anxiety, lay a newfound determination to approach this challenge head-on. After the final bell signaling the end of the school day rang, Jackson gathered his things with a clarity he hadn't felt in some time. He stepped outside, the cool breeze carrying away the lingering doubts. Today, it was no longer about what he had lost, but about what he aimed to create, a shift from dread to potential. As he approached the law office, Jackson contemplated how to frame his proposals to David. It would take more than mere words to convince him these painful pasts could be reshaped into something beneficial. The sun filtering through the trees cast dappled shadows, mimicking the contrast between his father's legacy and the future he envisioned for himself and his family. Inside the office, the air was thick with formality. A large wooden desk separated Jackson from David, who wore a carefully neutral expression. Jackson took a deep breath, steeling himself against the barrage of memories associated with his father, who had used that very desk as a launching pad for many of his business decisions that had tainted their family name. "Jackson," David greeted, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I appreciate you coming by on short notice." The tension was palpable, and Jackson could almost hear the echoes of the past conversations about wealth acquisitions that had spiraled out of control.
"What's the important development?" Jackson asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the apprehension roiling beneath. David unsealed an envelope, revealing a document with inscribed legal jargon. "Your father had a considerable stake in numerous local businesses, some quite profitable. However, there are also lingering debts and several properties under threat of foreclosure. It's imperative we address these points before rumors spread and the company starts hitting bankruptcy." The words hit Jackson like a cold wave. Is there a way to divert those resources towards something positive? I want to turn this around, not just for myself, but for the community. David raised an eyebrow, momentarily surprised. That's quite ambitious. The uphill battle against the existing debts will take significant maneuvering. However, if we can negotiate settlements with these creditors and maintain the businesses, you have a chance to reshape your father's legacy. An unfamiliar fire sparked in Jackson. What if part of that negotiation included commitments to social responsibility? Reinvesting in the community rather than solely focusing on profits could transform people's perspectives toward my father's legacy. David leaned back, assessing Jackson's fervor. That's an intriguing approach, but you will face resistance. People tend to cling to their preconceived notions, especially with a figure as controversial as your father. Jackson nodded, determination crystallizing within him. I can't let that sway me. If I accept this inheritance, I have to own it, create something meaningful that rebuilds trust. The tension between the two men shifted slightly, the lawyer nodding slowly. I will guide you through these waters, but you'll need a solid plan that resonates with the community. The conversation drifted into practicalities, but Jackson's mind raced ahead. He could feel the path unfolding before him, vivid and filled with challenges. He was ready to transform his father's dark footprint into a platform for educational growth and sustainable change. This was a chance to not only reclaim his narrative, but also become a beacon of hope. As Jackson left the office, he glanced back at the imposing building, realizing the journey was just beginning. The wisps of doubt still hung, but they were fading under the shine of his ambition, the desire to restore instead of destroy. But as he reached his car, a text notification interrupted his thoughts, a message from Sarah. Just as he tapped to read it, anxiety surged within him again. What if the revelation within shattered the fragile foundation he was trying to build? The face of the challenge loomed ahead as curtains of uncertainty pulled back, exposing a clearer view of the cold realities he would soon face. What surprise awaited him next? Jackson stared at his phone, heart pounding as he opened Sarah's message. It was short and cryptic. "We need to talk. It's about your father." The weight of her words hung like a thick cloud over him, the kind that promises a storm. Hesitation gripped him. He could already feel the churning tension beneath the surface of their relationship surfacing anew. His mind raced. What could it involve? He had been focused on reclaiming his father's legacy, yet those plans felt precarious now. The possible revelation could tip him into chaos, the chaos he had been working so diligently to avoid. After a deep breath, Jackson slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, its growl matching the tumult in his chest. He navigated the streets, the familiar route feeling like an uncertain path, each turn echoing with the unresolved past. He had to remain strong, to focus on the moment and the urgency of the challenges ahead. As he parked outside the cafe where they had agreed to meet, he noticed his reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone was the boy who followed in his father's footsteps blindly. A man emerged, one willing to confront the legacy left behind, even if it was fraught with discomfort. Walking into the cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee clashed with the unease that settled in his stomach. Sarah was already sitting at a table, her eyes scanning the room. She looked up as he approached, greeted him with a strange smile. "Hey," Jackson said, taking a seat across from her.
"Hey, thanks for coming." Her fingers played with the rim of her coffee cup, a nervous action he hadn't seen from her before. I wasn't sure how to say this." "Just say it," he urged, leaning forward, the remnants of fear edging closer. "I found something about your father. It's not easy to process, but it's important." Her voice wavered, and Jackson could see the conflict in her eyes. "Important how?" he pressed, heart racing. She took a deep breath. "I learned he was involved in more than just business ventures. There are allegations against him, connections that could affect the legacy you're trying to build. A lot of people are still angry." The implications hit him like a punch to the gut.
What kind of connections? What are you talking about? There was a tremor in her voice as she revealed the details. There are rumors about financial dealings that crossed ethical lines, illegitimate transactions. People lost their businesses because of him being a part of that. It could change everything you're trying to do with his estate. Jackson felt the room whirl around him. Financial ruin wasn't just about numbers. It was lives affected, families disrupted, the very community he aimed to uplift. This is not just paperwork. These are people. Exactly. And if it gets out, if they connect you to him, people might not be willing to support your vision. The enormity of the situation sank in, the very foundation of his aspirations threatened by a past he was only beginning to untangle. All that determination he had felt only moments ago now felt like a distant ember, small and flickering in the face of an approaching storm. What do we do then? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unresolved. We need to figure out a strategy, Sarah said, determination creeping back into our posture. You can't just ignore it. Confront it. Maybe turn it into something positive. Jackson's mind shifted gears, grasping at the pieces, trying to form a plan. If we address the past, we can reshape the narrative, but it has to be transparent. It has to show people the transformation. As Sarah nodded, a spark of partnership ignited between them. Jackson could feel the gears of his ambition turning once again. Yet this was a different challenge, one that could shatter anything he had started to build. Leaving the cafe, he felt that darkness threatened again, an overwhelming sense of urgency. The tangled legacy of his father had opened a door he hadn't prepared himself to confront. Jackson had to act fast. While the world's spotlight seemed dim on his father now, it only took one push to swing it back into harsh brightness. Still, every twist and turn could lead him to crawl back to complacency or leap forward, breaking free from inherited shadows. But as he stepped onto the street, the weight of the truth settled heavily over his shoulders. He knew it wouldn't be easy.
Would transparency restore trust, or would it be another sword thrust into the legacy he sought to mend? Determined, Jackson took his next step into the unknown, preparing to confront not just the world, but his own fears. What awaited him next would test the very fabric of his resolve. Would he rise, or would he succumb? Jackson didn't need to wait long before the next steps of his plan began to unfold. As he made his way back to his apartment, he felt the weight of urgency pressing down on him, spurring thoughts into action. He needed information, a deeper understanding of the allegations against his father. Knowledge, he reminded himself, could either empower him or further erode the fragile foundation he was hoping to build. He sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, fingers hovering above the keys. Jackson's heart raced at the thought of digging through his father's history, wondering what further darkness would emerge in the search for truth. Each keystroke felt like a leap into a minefield, where he had to tread carefully to avoid burying himself under the weight of his father's past. After hours of sifting through public records and articles, unease morphed into a hard knot of disbelief. These financial dealings, clouded in secrecy, painted a portrait of a man Jackson barely recognized, a man who had shown him a fragmented version of himself during their brief time together. The journals that his father had left behind seemed more like memories he wished to bury rather than treasures of wisdom to be passed on. Jackson read about investors swindled and families devastated, and with each detail he uncovered, the murmurs of betrayal echoed against his consciousness. Anger surfaced within him like a volatile tide. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, the very foundation shattered by his father's recklessness. His dreams of restoring honor to the family name felt increasingly out of reach, retreating further into the abyss of his father's misdeeds. Yet, in the midst of this turmoil, a different thought ignited. Perhaps he could take control. If he unveiled the truth, if he confronted the actions of the man who bore his name, could he flip the script? The notion of transparency transformed from a daunting task into an inevitable strategy, but it was not without risks. Jackson resolved to call a meeting with Farah. Her calm reasoning had sparked a fire within him, and he needed her insights as he navigated these treacherous waters. Before reaching out, he emptied his mind of doubts, focusing on his purpose, to tackle the legacy and reshape it into something that resonated with integrity rather than shame.
"Let's meet again," he typed, his fingertips darting across the keyboard. "I need your help to plan our next move." As the evening wore on, Jackson reflected on his father's actions and the shadows they cast. He couldn't change the past, but he could light a new path forward.
If he approached this right, he had the potential to redefine their history. His history. At dawn, he arrived at the cafe with renewed determination. He spotted Sarah, her countenance serious yet inviting. He slid into the seat opposite her, the air thick with unspoken words. "Last night was intense," he began, setting the tone as he detailed the findings of his research. Each revelation he shared fortified his resolve. If I can unveil the truth, maybe we can start to salvage what's left. Something pure, something genuine that honors those hurt. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to admiration. "You're ready," she finally said, her voice steady. "This isn't just about correcting your father's mistakes. It's about crafting the legacy you want to embrace." Jackson felt a powerful sense of agency creeping back into his spirit. He was no longer just a bystander, a victim of his father's decisions. He was choosing to shape his own narrative. As they planned their steps ahead, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that this endeavor was bigger than just his father's past. It was about him confronting his own identity, emerging from the shadows into a space of accountability and courage. But another thought pierced through the moment, a disconcerting awareness of those who abandoned their lives to his father's greed. Could they ever forgive? This revelation struck him like a bolt. His journey would not only test his resolve, but also be an act requiring enormous emotional strength. It was time to face his father's victims and offer something authentic, an opportunity to mend, albeit in small ways. Determined not to recoil from the responsibility, Jackson knew one thing: he had to approach them sooner rather than later. But would he be met with fury or compassion? The question loomed, larger and more daunting than any he had faced before. The next chapter of his life loomed ahead, but the cost of it would demand an emotional sacrifice he had yet to grasp fully. Would confronting the past allow him to reconcile his own demons, or would it unravel even the fragile threads of resolve he was striving to weave? As Jackson gazed across the cafe, the clinking of cups and hushed conversations around him melted into a haze, distant and irrelevant. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I know I need to speak with them, the families affected by my father's actions. It's a massive step, but it feels essential to move forward." "Essential, yes," she replied, her brow furrowed. "But you also need to prepare yourself for their reactions. It could be explosive." Jackson sensed the challenge ahead. He wasn't just confronting loss, but also the anger and blame that had curdled over years. "I'm willing to put myself out there. What they need isn't just an apology, it's accountability." "That's not a small feat, Jackson. You could be walking into a firestorm," Sarah cautioned, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "But on the other hand, confronting it may be the very thing that brings clarity to your path." Her words resonated, igniting a latent resolve within him. Every fiber of his being screamed for action, yet another subtle sentiment gnawed at him, a fear that he might not be enough to stem the tide of those lost hopes. They meticulously plotted out the logistics. Jackson could feel the entire spectrum of human feelings swirling within him: fear, guilt, determination. The sense of dismantling an insurmountable wall brick by brick unfolded before him. Yet he needed courage, a profound realization of his own worth in this tumultuous journey. Each idea turned about in their discussion acted like crucibles, catalyzing a transformation. In one such dialogue, Sarah proposed, "Why don't you reach out to each family first? Just a basic introduction. A letter might lay groundwork without putting them on the spot." Jackson found it a sound strategy, methodical and gentle. There was a comfort in the thought that he could soften the blow before the inevitable confrontation. "I can frame it as a personal journey," he suggested, reflecting on the countless hours poring over his father's misdeeds. "I want them to understand why it matters so much to me, not just because I'm his son, but because it's the right thing." "This could become your voice, a chance to redefine your narrative," Sarah noted, enthusiasm sparking behind her words. "Each person you contact could also help to guide you through what's needed most."
The act of drafting letters became not only an exercise in outreach, but a cathartic exploration of his own convictions. He began to see each name as more than casualties. They were lives irrevocably altered. This wasn't merely about his father anymore. It was about creating a bridge toward reparative justice. As he wrote, his thoughts flowed like a river, the current both turbulent and calming. There was an urgency behind each word that revealed not just his remorse, but also a longing for a connection that transcended the shame his father's legacy had imposed. Weeks later, each letter was in the mail, the ink still drying on the pages that represented a new dawn to him. Yet as he received the responses, the reality of his endeavor hit him with a stark clarity. For every sympathetic reply, there lay an equally weighted scorn, laden with bitterness and distrust. With his heart in his throat, Jackson prepared for the immediate fallout. The risk of facing injustice head-on felt more palpable than before.
Their anger, coupled with his resolve, would either illuminate a path toward healing or descend him into chaos. He clenched his jaw, knowing he would soon face emotional storms. Would he emerge resilient, or would he crumble under the weight of their pain? Anxiety gripped him tightly, daring him toward the unknown. And in that moment, as turmoil and anticipation mingled, the brutal reminder of his father's legacy loomed larger than ever. He would have to confront not only the victims of his father's betrayal, but also, inevitably, the lurking shadows of his own self-doubt. Would he crumble under the weight of it all, or discover a strength he never knew he possessed? The time had come to face the truth and his own vulnerabilities, and the battle was about to begin. The days following the letters felt like an eternity, each response weighing heavily on Jackson's psyche. The empathy he had hoped to foster now felt like a fragile glass ornament, poised to shatter with the slightest misstep. His thoughts flickered between optimism and apprehension, an internal tug-of-war that left him restless. With each envelope that arrived, he found himself at the intersection of vulnerability and resilience, the weight of his father's legacy refusing to be brushed aside. In one instance, the words from a mother of a victim pierced through the stillness of his thoughts. "Your name is mud. You'll never understand our pain." Jackson crumpled the letter, filled with an overwhelming sense of loss, not just for the families, but for his own chance of connection. Determined to not let bitterness fester, he sought refuge in the routine of his work. Yet the corporate environment felt suffocating against the backdrop of his personal turmoil. Meetings dragged on, filled with sterile discussions about quarterly profits and future projections, while internally he wrestled with how the discussions of numbers paled in comparison to the very real grief that clung to him like a shadow. "What's eating you?" Mike, a senior associate, asked one afternoon as they sat in the break room. There was genuine concern in the older man's eyes, a stark contrast to the emotional desolation within Jackson. "It's just family issues," he mumbled, underplaying the magnitude of his existential crisis. "You should figure it all out. You can't let it drag you down," Mike advised, his voice businesslike yet sincere. "Holding on to that baggage will only slow you down." And that was the moment something clicked. His subconscious began aligning in the face of uncertainty. What if the resolution of this internal struggle was as crucial as any business deal? It began to dawn on him that the courage he sought in confronting the families he had wronged wasn't just a personal venture. It could serve as a catalyst for his professional growth too. The next morning, driven by renewed clarity, Jackson began to articulate his thoughts into a coherent strategy. He devised a project that would intertwine his journey of accountability with a platform for others to share their stories. Rather than relegating his father's actions to mere historical artifacts discussed in boardrooms, he envisioned a visual campaign, a documentary-style series that would delve into the lives affected by corporate negligence in an attempt to create awareness and learning. This leap felt terrifying, yet exhilarating. He began to reach out to media collaborators, delving into the logistics of production, fundraising, and distribution, all while wrestling with the thought of facing the families. Each call and email was a mini confrontation, a microcosm of the impending emotional storm. He would have to manage his own narrative as he intertwined it with theirs, a balancing act fraught with vulnerability. As he voiced his intentions during these discussions, he sensed a shift within himself. There was a growing commitment to sharing perspectives, not merely as an obligation, but as a vital stepping stone toward redemption. With haste, Jackson drafted another letter, this time not to the families, but to potential partners in his envisioned project. It was an assertion of purpose. He would go beyond apologies. He envisioned a narrative construction interwoven with real outcomes. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about confronting it head-on. Yet, alongside this newfound determination, doubt lingered like a shadow. Would they accept him as a crucial part of the dialogue, or would he be met with the same sentiment as before? Could he truly remain objective while sharing the trauma that had unfolded, one that he had inherited but not personally enacted? With these reflections swirling in his mind, Jackson leaned into his office chair. He felt on the precipice of something greater, a challenge that transcended his previous confines. But as he prepared to send out the new letters, a sharper anxiety coursed through him. The acceptance or rejection he might face could redefine him once more, testing every resolution he had drawn upon. The battle was not just external, it was deeply internal. What awaited him on this path of shared narratives was unknown. Would this commitment to address his past lead to his ultimate empowerment, or expose him to deeper vulnerabilities than he had ever feared? The weight of his father's legacy pressed heavier than ever, and events were unraveling swiftly, pushing him toward a game-changing confrontation. The morning air felt different as Jackson entered the office. The nervous energy that had clung to him now surged into something that felt almost electric, infused with purpose. He reviewed his notes for the day, mentally preparing for a series of calls he had scheduled with potential partners for his documentary project.
Each discussion promised its own unique challenges and revelations, yet the recurring question nagged at him. Was he ready to step into this new role, one fraught with the weight of countless lives? With every initiative Jackson devised, he instinctively leveraged the corporate acumen honed through years in the business world. Yet now he faced an intricacy far beyond spreadsheets and projections. This wasn't about numbers, it was about lives and legacies. He braced himself against a palpable swell of anxiety, reminding himself that if he was to confront the families affected, he had to fully commit to articulating the stories truthfully. No embellishment, no minimization. The first call of the day was to Emma, a documentary producer known for her powerful narratives on societal injustices. She answered after a few rings, her voice seasoned with a depth that immediately put Jackson at ease. "I'm intrigued by your vision," she stated, cutting straight through the small talk. He could hear the wheels turning in her mind, an unmistakable sign of a professional who appreciated a compelling story. As he pitched his idea, he saw his initial nervousness morph into a steady conviction. He spoke of his father's actions, of the corporate negligence that could never be justified, and about how he hoped to create space for families to share their pain and resilience. "I want this project to serve as a bridge for healing. We need to confront the truth," he declared, his voice carrying an intensity that surprised him. Emma paused, the silence thick as she absorbed his words. "You realize how sensitive this material is, right? Accountability can be liberating, but it can also evoke the fiercest backlash from those you're trying to engage." Jackson hesitated, much more aware now of the dichotomy he faced. "I've been piecing together why I can't shy away from this. It's vital to break the cycle of silence wrapped around corporate misdeeds. But basically, yes, I worry. My connection by blood could define us, for better or worse." Her response was one of calculated empathy. "If you're going to do this, you have to own every part of your father's legacy. That means confronting not just the victims' families, but the larger system itself. Can you bear to show the raw truth?" The question struck him, a jolt that echoed down the corridors of his tightly held fears. Could he truly demonstrate the system's failures while also embracing his own? The weight of honesty threatened to push him to his limits. I'm committed to it. It's necessary." Once off the phone, an unexpected wave of exhilaration washed over him, mingled with the cold fist of anxiety. As he fought to collect his thoughts, he realized he was on the boundary of something potent. He could no longer hide behind the corporate veneer he had once cherished. Fueled by this understanding, Jackson made a decision. He needed an audience. The next call would be to the families, those he had once dreaded approaching. He composed a letter, delicately balancing his acknowledgement of their suffering
with a bold appeal to come together for his documentary. It felt daunting, terrifying even, but it was authentic, a reckoning layered with vulnerability that he had only begun to explore. As he prepared for that confrontation, he noticed a shifting within himself, a growing sense of agency. No longer merely the heir to a troubled legacy, he could wield his narrative like a sword against the pain of the past. Still, darker thoughts lingered. How would they respond? Would they see him as a trespasser seeking to profit from their grief, or as a kindred soul yearning to share their stories? With every keystroke, he tapped into both resolve and fear. This journey promised anguish alongside potential reconciliation, and he had yet to confront the ultimate test, his vulnerability in the face of their loss. The moment of reckoning bore down on him. Would he find the strength to own his part of this inherited pain, or would it define him in ways he could not yet fathom? As he clicked send on his letters, Jackson knew he was stepping into the unknown. A transformative confrontation awaited him, one that could reshape his very essence. And in this abyss of uncertainty, he realized he had one critical choice left to make. Would he rise to the challenge, baring his soul for the chance of a collective understanding, or would he retreat into the shadows cast by his father's legacy? Jackson sat at his desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his screen. The digital silence felt deafening after sending those letters, each one hanging in the air and waiting for responses that could shatter or affirm his course. The thrill he'd felt after his call with Emma was waning, replaced now by a heavy anticipation, tangled with self-doubt. Was he truly prepared to face the families? Each of them had suffered because of corporate neglect, and now he was stretching a thin thread of hope between them and him, a vessel for their stories. The weight of their grief loomed large in his mind, threatening to crush him under its enormity. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma grounding him momentarily. The warmth filled his hands, a small comfort against the chill creeping into his heart. He thought of the words he had carefully chosen for each letter. Would they even read them? Would they welcome him? Or would he be met with hostility? Then, amidst his swirling thoughts, something shifted. A memory surfaced. His father, unraveling under the pressure of secrets and scandals, often muttering about the importance of truth. "It's the only thing that sets you free," he'd said. Words that once felt hollow began to resonate. Jackson inhaled deeply. By confronting the past, he wasn't burying it deeper, but rather unearthing it, an act of reclamation that he had to believe in.
Each story he hoped to unravel would grant agency not just to the families, but to himself as well. This was no simple task of compiling facts or crafting narratives. It was an act of responsibility, one requiring empathy and courage. His phone vibrated on the desk, pulling him from introspection. It was a message from Emma, her straightforward demeanor apparent even through text. "I'd love to brainstorm more about structure and audience outreach. Let me know when you're ready." Jackson knew he needed to engage her, let her guidance bolster him as he faced the families. They faced a shared battle, a call for truth. He quickly typed a response, arranging a meeting for the following day. As he pressed send, a sense of purpose returned. He might not have all the answers, but he was slowly discovering how to ask the right questions. That evening, as he prepared for bed, the silence of his apartment magnified his isolation. How many others had sat in lonely rooms, grappling with similar choices? Pain was universal, yet so were the stories that could emerge to heal. His father's legacy clung to him like shadows, but now Jackson saw flickers of light. When he awoke the next morning, he felt oddly different. An almost determined clarity had settled in him. He donned a crisp button-down shirt, a small signal to himself that he was ready to face whatever awaited him. The meeting with Emma that afternoon flowed effortlessly. Ideas sparked between them, illuminating pathways he hadn't previously considered. They discussed the framing of the documentary, weighing words carefully, while Jackson honed the narrative arc he wished to create, one that would bridge the gap between loss and understanding. As they delved deeper into the logistics, Jackson felt his confidence swelling. In those moments, he wasn't just the son of a contentious figure. He was a storyteller on a mission. Emma encouraged him to think about how to present the family's narratives, not just as tragedy, but as resilience. a celebration of lives intertwined with grief and growth. By the time he left the meeting, he was riding waves of renewed motivation, yet it was tinged with an awareness that the real tests lay ahead. He found himself reflecting on his unresolved fears from the previous days. The email responses were still pending, their arrival weighing heavily upon him, and doubts attached themselves again like ivy around his thoughts. What if they refused to speak? What if they placed blame solely on him, damning him for his father's legacy? With every heartbeat, a realization emerged. He could not change the past, but he could shape the narrative of the present. It was time to confront the reality he feared most. And so he steeled himself for the inevitable waiting game. Each tick of the clock strained into a small eternity as he held back the urge to reach for his phone, searching for those letters he had sent and the lives they would impact.
Emboldened by his new understanding, Jackson prepared to venture out into the world beyond his office walls, armed with purpose and an unwavering commitment to honesty. Yet he still couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows lingered, patiently waiting for their moment. When his phone chimed, a response finally arriving from one of the families, it felt like a thunderclap in an otherwise clear sky. The moment had arrived. Would they embrace him, or would he be cast away as a pariah? The answer was within his grasp, but would he be ready to seize it? Jackson awoke the next day with a clarity he had never possessed before, a deep, primal urge to confront his inheritance with unyielding authenticity. The responses to his letters weighed heavily in the balancing scale of his conscience. He gathered his resolve. It was time to act not only for himself, but for those who had endured so much pain. As he opened the laptop and scanned the screen, his heart raced. 5 emails lay there, each one a thread to those affected by his father's actions. He felt a mixture of trepidation and excitement mingle within him. This was a crucible of opportunity, an opportunity to forge a new legacy. The first message was from the Smith family. Their response was an emotional cascade that brought Jackson back to the night of writing their letter. He was met with raw anger, with visceral pain spilling from their words. "Don't think for a second that you can smooth over the years of anguish and betrayal," they wrote. Yet beneath the anger lay an undercurrent of willingness to listen, a glimmer of hope that reminded Jackson they shared a commonality, a desire for some sort of closure. With each response, the fear within him started to transform. He recognized their hurt. Listening to them could be his gateway toward healing, not just for them, but also for himself. The weight of his father's legacy began to morph from a burden into a shared history fraught with complexity. Convinced of the necessity to address the families personally, Jackson reached for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed the Smiths' number. Each ring felt like a chime signaling gravity's pull, bringing him one step closer to reconciliation. When a warm, tentative voice answered, Jackson took a deep breath and introduced himself. He spoke with courage, weaving through the emotional landscape that had surrounded their lives. "I understand your anger," he began, "but I wish to hear your story. I want to build a path toward healing, not just for my family, but for yours too." The conversation unfolded like a delicate bud, slowly revealing itself despite the chill in the air. To his surprise, as the conversation progressed, the atmosphere shifted. They began to share their agony, the years filled with uncertainty, loss, and betrayal. As their words enveloped Jackson, he felt strangely liberated. By lending his ear to their suffering, he could weave threads of mutual understanding into the tapestry of pain his father had left behind. Days turned into weeks as Jackson continued to reach out, each conversation revealing deeper layers of grief and resilience within the families. The experience was harrowing, yet cathartic. He had plunged into the very essence of their shared trauma, and it transformed him wholly. Each story he recorded would serve as a stone laid on the foundation of his documentary, a powerful testament to the human spirit's endurance. Armed with their stories, Jackson's conviction solidified. He wasn't just an heir to a tainted legacy. He was becoming an advocate for the families his father had wronged. He approached Emma again, buoyed by the personal narratives he had absorbed. "We need to make this about them," he asserted as they sat across from one another, setting the groundwork for the documentary project. "This isn't merely an exploration of a family's business failures. It's about the lived experiences that arose from those failures." As they laid out their plans, Jackson felt his purpose crystallizing. The documentary began to forge its own identity, no longer just a channel to address his past, but a platform for giving voice to those who had been silenced. Weeks later, as filming commenced, Jackson allowed the cameras to capture his authentic self. He stood in front of the lens, enveloped in the emotion of the individual stories. They weren't solely narratives.
They were living testaments to humanity's intersection of suffering and survival. When the film was finally screened for the families, Jackson held his breath, heart racing. As the credits rolled, he dared to look at their faces. To his astonishment and relief, shared tears washed over the audience, followed by tentative smiles. They received his effort not as an intrusion, but as acknowledgement, a bridge spanning years of hurt. The journey had transformed him. Jackson Miller was no longer a teacher tainted by doubt. He had established himself as a leader willing to take a stand for what was right. The recognition from the families became his affirmation. He had become what he had always aspired to be, a changemaker. As the lights dimmed and the final applause echoed in the auditorium, Jackson felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction replace the dread that had clouded him. He had not only reclaimed his father's name, but written a new chapter of resilience and authenticity. This was not the end. It was just the beginning of a brighter legacy, one built on honesty and compassion. And for every setback, every letter that had initially inspired fear, Jackson now embraced as essential steps towards this moment. He had emerged from his father's shadow, not a successor bearing the burden of misdeeds, but a beacon of hope, proving they could create a future grounded in integrity. Now it's your turn to connect.
Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support matters. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Let your voice be heard. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion, because this is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Remember, only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.